The UK's cost of living crisis has reached a breaking point, and it's worse than you think. Over the past year, energy bills have soared by 50%, while inflation is at its highest in decades, pushing the price of everyday essentials like food and fuel to levels most people can't afford. But it doesn't stop there. Wages haven't kept up with rising costs, leaving millions of families trapped in a never-ending cycle of financial stress. And if you think things might get better, think again. Housing prices are climbing to unprecedented highs, making it nearly impossible for first-time buyers to enter the market. Meanwhile, essential public services like healthcare and education are crumbling under the pressure, leaving people without the support they desperately need. But that's not all. The ripple effects of Brexit and global economic uncertainty are pushing prices even higher, creating a perfect storm that's squeezing the life out of ordinary people. With taxes on the rise and food insecurity spreading across the nation, it's clear that the UK's financial future is on the edge of collapse. So what happens next? Will the government step in before it's too late? Or will we continue to sink deeper into this crisis? In the next few minutes, we're breaking down 10 shocking reasons why the UK's cost of living crisis is worse than you think, and what it could mean for your future. Stay with us as we uncover the full picture. Number 1. Rising energy prices. One of the most immediate and devastating impacts of the UK's cost of living crisis is the skyrocketing energy prices. Over the past year, energy bills have increased by staggering amounts, with some households seeing a rise of over 50% in their electricity and gas costs. This surge has been driven by a mix of global supply shortages, inflation, and domestic policy decisions, leaving many families struggling to keep the lights on and their homes warm. In fact, millions of households across the UK are now facing a real crisis when it comes to heating their homes during the colder months. Winter has become a financial burden rather than a season of comfort. People are now faced with an impossible choice: pay for heat or pay for food. This stark dilemma is leaving families feeling stressed, anxious, and financially stretched to their breaking point. The government's energy cap, which was once seen as a safety net, has failed to keep up with the sharp increases in global energy prices. While the government has introduced some financial relief measures, these are still not enough to cover the costs for many households. For those on fixed incomes or low wages, this rise in energy costs is particularly painful. Older adults, especially those who are vulnerable or disabled, are disproportionately affected, often having to decide whether to endure cold temperatures or risk health complications. Energy poverty is now a growing concern, and experts predict that without significant intervention, the situation will only get worse. The rise in energy prices is not just a minor inconvenience. It is a life-altering challenge that has pushed many families to the brink. As energy bills continue to climb, the future looks bleak for those struggling to afford the basics. This crisis has reached a breaking point, and urgent action is needed to prevent widespread hardship. Number 2. Inflation's impact on essentials. Another major factor contributing to the UK's cost of living crisis is the relentless rise in inflation. Over the past year, inflation rates have soared, hitting levels not seen in decades. Essential goods such as food, transportation, and healthcare are now more expensive than ever, making it increasingly difficult for families to manage their budgets. This inflationary pressure is particularly felt by those on lower incomes, as they spend a higher proportion of their earnings on these essentials. Take groceries, for example. Basic items like bread, milk, and vegetables have seen sharp price hikes. Families who were once able to feed themselves comfortably now find themselves faced with the tough decision of what they can afford to buy. Many have been forced to downgrade their shopping habits, choosing cheaper, less nutritious options, which can have long-term health consequences. The rising price of food is making nutrition harder to maintain for those with limited budgets, adding to the social and health burdens already created by this crisis. But it's not just food. Transportation costs are also skyrocketing. Fuel prices have soared, pushing the cost of getting to work or school higher. especially for those who rely on private vehicles. Public transport fares are increasing as well, further impacting low-income workers and families who can no longer afford to commute as easily. Even healthcare costs are feeling the pinch of inflation. Medical supplies, prescriptions, and dental care are all becoming more expensive, putting a strain on people who are already struggling financially. For many, basic healthcare has become another unaffordable luxury. In short, inflation is pushing the cost of living essentials beyond reach for millions. As prices continue to rise, it's clear that daily survival is becoming increasingly difficult, especially for vulnerable populations. Without substantial support, this pressure will only intensify, making it harder for families to cope. Number 3. Wages not keeping up with inflation. A critical aspect of the UK's cost of living crisis is that wages are simply not keeping pace with the rising costs of essentials. Over the past several years, wage growth has remained relatively stagnant, while inflation has surged at an alarming rate. The result? Workers are now earning less in real terms than they were before, making it increasingly difficult to afford even basic necessities. This wage stagnation is hitting especially hard for middle-class and low-income workers, who already struggle to make ends meet. The stark contrast between wage growth and the cost of living has created a situation where even those with full-time jobs are finding themselves in financial difficulty. In fact, recent reports show that wage increases have failed to match the rising costs of housing, food, and energy, leaving people with less disposable income than before. As a result, people are forced to either cut back on daily expenses or take on additional work just to stay afloat. For many, the lack of salary progression has led to a feeling of frustration and hopelessness. While costs keep rising, paychecks remain the same, leaving workers feeling trapped in a cycle of financial insecurity. This has led to increasing dissatisfaction with employers who, despite record profits, have failed to raise wages in line with inflation. As the cost of living continues to climb, many workers are being pushed to the edge, with no real relief in sight. Additionally, the minimum wage in the UK, though it has seen some increases, still falls far below what is needed for a decent standard of living, especially in high-cost areas like London and other major cities. As a result, many individuals are stuck in low-paying jobs, unable to escape the financial pressures of rising costs. Until wages start to increase in proportion to the cost of living, the financial strain on workers will only continue to worsen. Number 4. Housing crisis. The housing crisis in the UK is a central factor driving the country's cost of living crisis, with both rentals and house prices reaching unaffordable levels for many. Over the past decade, the cost of housing has skyrocketed, leaving large segments of the population unable to either buy or rent decent homes. This surge in property prices and rents has outpaced wage growth, leaving many families trapped in precarious housing situations. For those trying to buy a home, house prices have risen by more than 10% in some areas, with the average price of a house in the UK reaching record highs. This is especially true in major cities like London, Manchester, and Bristol, where first-time buyers are struggling to save for deposits. In fact, the deposit requirement alone has become a nearly insurmountable barrier for many young people, forcing them to either give up on home ownership or remain in rental properties well into adulthood. For renters, the situation is just as dire. Rent prices have increased dramatically, particularly in the private rental market, with many landlords raising rents to match rising property values. As a result, tenants find themselves spending a larger portion of their income on rent, leaving little for other essentials like food and utilities. In fact, many renters are now being forced to live in smaller, less desirable properties or move further away from urban centres, increasing their commuting costs and reducing their quality of life. The lack of affordable social housing is another major issue. The demand for affordable housing has far outstripped supply, with long waiting lists in many areas. This is leaving many individuals and families with no choice but to turn to the private sector, where rents are increasingly unaffordable. Until the UK addresses the housing crisis by increasing affordable housing supply and controlling rent inflation, millions will continue to face housing insecurity. Number 5. Increased tax burden. As the cost of living continues to rise, one of the factors exacerbating the crisis is the increased tax burden placed on UK residents. Over the past few years, several taxes have been raised or introduced, placing additional pressure on individuals and families already struggling to make ends meet. From national insurance contributions to value-added tax, VAT, hikes, these taxes are taking a larger share of people's incomes, leaving them with even less money to cover the soaring cost of essentials like food, energy, and housing. For instance, national insurance rates have been increased in recent years, directly affecting workers' take-home pay. These increases are particularly hard on low and middle-income workers who rely heavily on their wages to cover basic living expenses. With a higher portion of their income being taxed, these workers are feeling the financial strain even more. In some cases, this has led to budget cuts in other areas of life, such as healthcare, education, and transportation. Additionally, VAT, a tax applied to many goods and services, has also been a significant contributor to rising costs. As the VAT rate has gone up, the price of many everyday goods has increased, putting even more pressure on families. While VAT is a broad-based tax that affects all consumers, it disproportionately impacts lower-income households, who spend a larger portion of their income on essential goods and services. What's particularly concerning is that these tax increases are not accompanied by a corresponding increase in government support for struggling households. Instead, many feel as though they are being taxed into a situation where it becomes nearly impossible to save or invest in their future. With wages stagnant and inflation pushing prices higher, the increased tax burden is another critical factor, driving the UK into a deeper cost of living crisis. Until this burden is addressed, the financial strain on households will only grow. Number 6. Food insecurity. Food insecurity has become a growing concern in the UK, as the rising cost of living continues to impact households across the country. As inflation drives up prices for basic food items, many families are struggling to afford enough nutritious meals. The cost of staples like bread, milk, fruit, and vegetables has surged in recent months, leaving families with less money to spend on healthier options. As a result, many individuals are being forced to make tough choices when it comes to feeding themselves and their families. The sharp increase in food prices is largely driven by a combination of factors. The global supply chain crisis, labour shortages, and ongoing climate-related disruptions have all contributed to higher food costs. Additionally, the Brexit fallout has disrupted trade with European countries, leading to shortages and price hikes on imported goods. For households already living paycheck to paycheck, these rising costs are becoming unsustainable. What's particularly alarming is the impact this has on nutritional health. As food prices increase, many families are forced to purchase cheaper, less nutritious foods. Processed foods, which are often higher in sugar, salt, and fats, have become more appealing due to their lower cost. However, these foods can lead to long-term health issues like obesity, heart disease, and diabetes. The inability to afford fresh produce and healthy meals is contributing to a public health crisis, with rising rates of diet-related diseases across the UK. For children, this situation is even more concerning. Childhood hunger is on the rise, with more children going to bed hungry due to their families' inability to afford adequate food. This not only affects their physical health, but also their mental well-being and academic performance. As food insecurity continues to spread, it's clear that rising prices are pushing more and more people into a cycle of poverty. The most basic of human needs, nutrition, becomes a luxury few can afford. Number 7. The strain on public services. As the UK faces an escalating cost of living crisis, another significant consequence is the strain on public services. Essential services such as healthcare, education, and transportation are becoming increasingly difficult for the government to fund and maintain, leaving citizens with diminished access to the services they rely on. These public sector issues are exacerbating the financial pressures already felt by millions of people, creating a vicious cycle where citizens are expected to pay more while receiving less in return. The NHS, National Health Service, which has long been a cornerstone of the UK's public welfare, is under immense pressure. Rising costs of medical supplies, staff shortages, and increased patient demand have stretched the NHS to its breaking point. Wait times for appointments and treatments have soared, with some patients waiting months for vital procedures. This delay not only affects people's health, but also has financial consequences. Many are forced to take time off work due to illness or injury, which further deepens their financial struggles. In the realm of education, schools are grappling with budget cuts, fewer resources, and overcrowded classrooms. Teachers and students alike are feeling the effects of underfunded education systems. As inflation rises, the costs of materials, facilities, maintenance, and staff salaries are outpacing the available funding. The result is a deteriorating quality of education for students, further entrenching socio-economic inequality. Public transportation has also taken a hit. As fuel prices rise, transportation costs have surged, making it harder for working-class individuals to afford daily commutes. With limited public transport options in many areas, people are forced to rely on increasingly expensive services. The result of this public sector strain is that essential services, which should be supporting the public, are instead contributing to the burden. Without adequate investment and reform, these services will continue to suffer, leaving citizens in an even more vulnerable position amid the ongoing crisis. Number 8. Impact of Brexit on the economy. The long-term effects of Brexit continue to reverberate throughout the UK economy, exacerbating the country's cost of living crisis. Since the UK left the European Union, the country has faced significant challenges in several areas, including trade, labour shortages, and economic instability, all of which are driving up the cost of living. As businesses struggle to adapt to new rules and regulations, prices for everyday goods and services continue to climb, further stretching household budgets. One of the most noticeable impacts of Brexit has been the disruption of trade between the UK and EU countries. The end of free movement has led to delays at borders, increased red tape, and additional costs for importers and exporters. These disruptions have caused supply chain issues, leading to shortages of many goods, from food to electronics, pushing their prices higher. The lack of access to the EU's single market has made it more expensive for businesses to import products, and these increased costs are passed on to consumers. Additionally, labour shortages have become a serious problem since Brexit. Many industries, such as agriculture, healthcare, and hospitality, relied heavily on workers from EU countries. With tighter immigration policies, businesses have found it difficult to fill vacancies, leading to increased wages in certain sectors. While this might seem like a positive development for workers, it has led to higher operational costs for employers, which ultimately results in higher prices for consumers. The economic instability caused by Brexit has also contributed to the rising cost of living. The uncertainty surrounding trade deals and long-term economic prospects has created a climate of investment hesitation, which affects everything from housing prices to stock market performance. This ongoing uncertainty is driving costs higher and leaving UK citizens feeling increasingly insecure about their financial future. Until Brexit's economic challenges are addressed, the cost of living will continue to rise. Number 9. Lack of government support. One of the key drivers behind the UK's escalating cost of living crisis is the lack of government support for struggling households. Despite the growing financial pressures faced by millions, the government's response has often been insufficient or ineffective, leaving people to fend for themselves in increasingly difficult circumstances. With inflation soaring and essential costs like energy, food, and housing continuing to rise, many feel that the government is failing to provide the necessary relief or solutions to ease their burdens. One of the most noticeable shortcomings has been the inadequate financial assistance offered to low and middle-income families. While temporary measures, such as energy bill subsidies or universal credit increases, have been introduced, they have often been insufficient to fully address the scale of the crisis. For example, while the government has provided one-off payments to help with energy bills, these payments have not been enough to counterbalance the long-term rise in energy prices. As a result, many people are still left struggling to pay their bills. Moreover, the lack of affordable housing has continued to be a significant issue, yet the government has been slow to implement meaningful reforms. Despite numerous promises to tackle the housing crisis, affordable housing stock remains insufficient, and rising house prices and rent are making it harder for people to find a place to live. The widening wealth gap is another consequence of the government's limited action. Wealthier individuals and businesses are able to weather the storm of rising costs, while the most vulnerable populations, such as low-income families, elderly individuals, and disabled people, are left without the necessary support. Without urgent action from the government to address these issues, the financial hardships experienced by millions of UK residents will only deepen, leaving them in a vicious cycle of poverty and insecurity. Number 10. Uncertainty in global markets. The uncertainty in global markets is another significant factor contributing to the UK's cost of living crisis. As the world faces economic challenges, from supply chain disruptions to rising geopolitical tensions, the UK is feeling the ripple effects. These global uncertainties have driven up the prices of essential goods, further straining households that are already struggling to make ends meet. With the global economy in turmoil, the cost of everyday items continues to climb, adding additional pressure to already stretched budgets. One of the main factors contributing to this uncertainty is the global supply chain crisis. The COVID-19 pandemic, combined with trade disruptions, has resulted in delays and shortages of many key goods, from food to technology. This disruption has caused inflation to soar, with prices for everyday products rising sharply. In the UK, these global disruptions have led to a shortage of goods, particularly in the food sector, pushing prices higher and making it harder for consumers to find the products they need at an affordable price. In addition, geopolitical tensions, such as the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, have had a major impact on global energy prices. The war has disrupted oil and gas supplies, leading to higher fuel prices, which in turn increases the cost of transportation and goods. This has a cascading effect on the entire economy, as businesses face higher costs and pass those on to consumers. Fuel price increases are one of the largest contributors to inflation, as it impacts everything from grocery costs to travel expenses. Finally, economic instability across major global economies, such as the EU and the US, has created an unpredictable financial environment. The volatility in currency exchange rates, stock market fluctuations, and shifts in global trade dynamics all contribute to a sense of economic uncertainty. Until global markets stabilise, the UK's cost of living will remain under significant strain, further burdening the population. The UK's cost of living crisis is not just a temporary setback. It's a full-blown financial storm that's affecting millions. From skyrocketing energy bills to housing affordability issues, this crisis is touching every part of life. The future is uncertain, and the pressure is mounting on households across the country. What will happen next? Will the government step up to prevent even worse outcomes? We've shared 10 hard-hitting reasons why things have reached this breaking point, and the situation is far from over. If you found this video eye-opening, we'd love to hear your thoughts. How is the cost of living crisis impacting you or your community? Drop your comments below and join the conversation. Your experience matters. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It's just one click, and it means a lot to us. We're putting in a lot of effort to bring you these insights, and your support helps us keep going. Stay tuned for more in-depth analysis and updates by subscribing today. Let's stay informed together.